1 month into the Ukraine war, reining in Russia using sanctions still proved difficult for the European member countries who were deeply entangled with Putin due to their reliance on Russian gas and oil. How did that reliance come about, and is there any chance for them to break free from the need for Russian energy? The current European dependence on Russian oil began decades ago, during the Reagan era and with the promise of a pipeline. That Soviet pipeline traverses the landscape between Siberia and Germany and brings with it much-needed gas imports that, according to a March 1981 CIA memo, were needed to offset likely declines in oil supplies for the 6 European countries in question. They also argued that related equipment sales by West European firms would create thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in business. Despite those positives, the CIA warned of some serious risks in creating this type of infrastructure with the Soviet Union. In their memo titled USSR Western Europe, Implications of the Siberia to Europe Gas Pipeline, they found that such a pipeline would provide the Soviet one additional pressure point they could use as a part of broader diplomatic offensive to persuade the Western Europeans to accept their viewpoint on East-West issues. Citing as an example an attempt to undermine European willingness to act in concert with the U.S. on economic sanctions against the Soviets or on security issues. They also cite a potential for natural gas weapon, stating that the likelihood is strong that the Soviets will attempt subtle exploitation of the developing natural gas relationship, and warning that the effects of that pressure would depend on West European and NATO cohesion and will and progress over the next few years by Western Europe in installing insurance in the form of strategic reserves and fuel substitution capability. A bitter dispute followed. Reagan vehemently opposed the pipeline and issued sanctions preventing American corporations from participating in the construction and operation of that pipeline. But after what the New York Times calls a public relations and lobbying blitz that played out across newspaper opinion pages, congressional committees, and a direct appeal to the White House, Reagan backed away from the sanctions, and the pipeline moved forward. In the decades since, 2 more pipelines, the Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2, have been added, both running under the Baltic Sea and taking gas from the Russian coast to Germany. Together, they could deliver 110 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe every year. But while the Nord Stream has been operational since 2011, the $10 billion Nord Stream 2 project has been put on hold. The US, UK, Poland, and Ukraine strongly opposed the project, fearing that it would provide Russia with an even greater stranglehold on Europe. Ukrainian President Zelensky has called it a dangerous political weapon, and German regulators are fearful that because Russian state-owned firm Gazprom owns both a 50% stake in the pipeline and all the gas that goes through it, Russia would have too much control over supply. That supply is substantial. Even without the Nord Stream 2, Russia currently provides roughly 40% of the European Union's natural gas imports. Russian supply drying up leaves Europe vulnerable, especially Germany and Italy, who consume 42.6 billion cubic meters and 29.2 billion cubic meters respectively. Belarus, Turkey, the Netherlands, Hungary, Kazakhstan, Poland, China, and Japan are also at risk if Russia cuts off the supply. And Russia has a history of tinkering with the supply when they feel politically justified in doing so. The Soviets cut off oil supply to Yugoslavia in 1948, to Israel in 1956, and to China in the early and mid-1960s. More recently and more notably, Russia cut off gas supplies to the European region in the 2009 diplomatic dispute with Ukraine. According to the New York Times, they left tens of thousands of homes without heat and more than a dozen people froze to death, mainly in Poland, before Russia reopened its pipelines. The risks the CIA warned us of in 1981 are just as real today, and we are just as unprepared for them. The EU had proposed a plan to end reliance on Russian oil by 2030, but now, 8 years ahead of that date, finds itself scrambling to find alternatives in order to end their participation in the funding of the attack on Ukraine. The US has committed at least 15 billion cubic meters to Europe in the remainder of 2022, along with its commitment to making sure the family in Europe can get through this winter and the next, while we're building the infrastructure for a diversified, resilient, and clean energy future, as Biden said in a recent statement at the U.S. Chief of Mission residence in Brussels. But 15 billion cubic meters won't be enough to meet that goal. And without help from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Venezuela, there seemed to be no real plan on how to offset European reliance on Russian gas and oil. Or there's one more route. According to Bloomberg, if there's any country that might have been in a position to rescue Europe from its energy crisis, it's the US, home to vast shale fields holding a seemingly endless supply of natural gas and giant terminals capable of liquefying it and delivering it abroad. But American shale drillers refuse to drill more. Why? We'll explain in our next video. "也是从贞元19年开始，元稹的名字逐渐成为白居易的笔下主角。譬如曲江忆元酒，这是写在春天的一首诗。春来无伴闲游少，行乐3分减2分。何况今朝杏园里，闲人逢镜不逢君。春天来了，白兄出门赏花去了。心怀的期待大抵就是风和日丽的曲江边，人群中风姿卓绝的元稹迎面走来，彼此相视一笑，为这心意相投的路遇，然后他们就一起快乐春日游。然而可怜的白兄晃荡了一天，杏花天里云淡风轻，眼前人来人往，却遍寻不得元稹的踪影，自然是心头无比的索然。于是泱泱不乐地写诗小记。今天出门，元酒不曾作伴同游，我的兴致本已3分减去2分，只余下1分期待，指望在曲江边的游客中间能找到元稹，然而也并没有，于是连这1分游兴也没有了。总之，虽然是个杏花天，今天却是十分索然的一天。西明寺牡丹花忆元酒，这首诗是元稹去洛阳岳丈家做毛脚女婿时，白居易在长安城游荡时写下的诗。西明寺的牡丹花开了，这令他分外的思念不能同来赏花的元稹。前年题名处，今日看花来。一座云香丽，3见牡丹开。岂独花堪惜，方知老暗催。何况寻花伴，东都去未回。俱知红方策，春尽思悠哉。对于相识之初的白居易和元稹而言，西明寺的牡丹花，曲江的慈恩寺的四季风物，是他们共同的流连，见证他们的相谈甚欢，相见甚悦。春天是要有元稹，才花开有情，春深似海。牡丹的花时姹紫嫣红，摇黄未紫，要是有元稹在白兄身边相伴，花间游走，两人指指点点，谈谈讲讲。